So in this video, I'm going to show you how to do over 300 million damage with the Barbarian in Season 3 with no Uber uniques. So no Grandfather Sword and no Shaco, and without using your pet. I have discovered a way where you can easily set up the Earthstriker legendary aspect and the Red Furor unique ring at the same time, without the need of any enemies around you or without using any shouts. So you can set up the Big One-Shot Overpower Hit anywhere. Now I call this technique the Overpower Life Swap Technique, or the OP Life Swap Tech for short. Now I did discover this technique in Season 2, but I did have to make some adjustments because the Ring of Red Furor unique aspect did slightly change. So I highly recommend you to watch this video from the beginning to the end to see how everything synergizes. So let's check this out. Okay, so first I want to mention that I discovered this technique in Season 2. So in order to do the Big One-Shot Overpower Hit, you have to set up the Earthstriker legendary aspect with the Red Furor unique ring. But the setup is slightly different because the Ring of Red Furor unique ring did change. You have a 3-second time limit for your core skill to guarantee a critical strike. So we do have to set up the Ring of Red Furor unique rings aspect in the middle when setting up the Earthstriker legendary aspect. And I discovered a way to do this 100% of the time with no enemies around or without using any shouts. And in order to apply vulnerable to the Uber bosses, we are going to use the exploit glyph, and we're also going to use the Godslayer crown's unique aspect to greatly increase our damage. And I do want to mention that Uber Duriel has around 190 million health in a 4-man party, so doing around 200 million damage is more than enough to one-shot Uber Duriel. But with this build and setup, I average around 300 million damage, and on the high end I saw around 400 million damage, and on the low end I average around 220 million damage. But this build does average around 300 million damage when setting up the one-shot overpower hit correctly. Now if you're having trouble defeating Uber Lilith, I discovered a way to easily defeat Uber Lilith and dodge all her mechanics without any Uber uniques using this method, but with some changes. But I'll have an updated video on how to easily defeat Uber Lilith, so stay tuned. So first I'm going to explain how to set up the Earthstriker legendary aspect, and then how to set up the Ring of Red Furor unique ring, and then I'll explain how to set up the Ring of Red Furor unique ring in the middle when setting up the Earthstriker legendary aspect because of the 3-second time limit. But I'll go over everything in details in their dedicated sections. Okay, so in order to do the OP Life Swap Tech and do over 300 million damage, you need these skills on your skill bar. So you do need 2 basic skills in order to easily swap weapons and generate U Fury. So the first basic skill I'm using is Lunging Strike, and for the arsenal selection, make sure you change it to your slashing weapon. The next basic skill I'm using is Frenzy, and for the arsenal selection, it's automatically selected to your dual wielding weapons. The next skill I'm using is Hammer of the Ancients, and this is our main damage dealing skill. This skill can easily one-shot any Uber bosses, and for the arsenal selection, it's automatically selected to your bludgeoning weapon. The next skill I'm using is Rallying Cry, and this skill will grant you Unstoppable and generate you Fury. The next skill I'm using is War Cry, and this skill will grant you Berserking and greatly increase your damage. And the last skill I'm using is the ultimate skill, Wrath of the Berserker, and this skill will grant you Berserking, Unstoppable, and greatly increase your damage. Okay, so next I'm going to explain how to do the OP Life Swap Tech to do over 300 million damage with no Uber uniques. So first I'm going to show you how to set up the Earthstriker legendary aspect, and then how to set up the Ring of Red Furor unique aspect, and then I'll explain how to set up both the aspects together to do the Big One-Shot Overpower Hit. So in order to set up the Earthstriker legendary aspect, you need to swap your weapons 8 times. And when you see this icon on the bottom, this will indicate that your Earthstriker's legendary aspect is active, and your next skill will be an Overpower Hit. Okay, so now in order to set up the Ring of Red Furor unique rings aspect, you have to use Hammer of the Ancients twice. And once you get this icon, your next core skill is guaranteed to critical strike, but be aware that you have 3 seconds to use this proc. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to do the Overpower Life Swap technique and show how it's slightly different from before, because they did change the Ring of Red Furor unique ring to have a 3-second time limit to use your core skill that will guarantee a critical strike. So you can't set up the Ring of Red Furor unique aspect early. You have to set up this unique aspect in the middle when you're swapping weapons for your Earthstriker legendary aspect. So first, what I like to do is to swap weapons 6 times. So once you see this icon with 6 swaps, then you want to use Hammer of the Ancients twice, and then you'll see your swap weapons will be at 7, and then you will have the icon that your next core skill will critical strike. And then you want to use all your shouts, so Rallying Cry, War Cry, and Wrath of the Berserker. And then you want to use your basic skill on the Uber boss, so I use Lunging Strike to get your ace swap. And doing a quick hit on the boss with your basic skill will apply vulnerable to the boss because of the exploit glyph, and it will also proc the unique aspect on the Godslayer crown unique helmet. And then after the basic skill hit, you want to use your Hammer of the Ancients, and you want to do all of this within 3 seconds in order to do the Big One-Shot Overpower Hit because of the time limit on the Ring of Red Furor unique ring. And with that, you should be doing around 300 million damage, which can easily one-shot Uber Duriel and any Uber bosses. Okay, so next for the skill tree. And I do want to mention that every skill point isn't needed in order to do the big one-shot hit, doing over 300 million damage. For example, you don't need any defensive or survivability skills because the Uber boss will die in one hit anyway. So I'm just going to highlight the important skills on the skill tree. And this skill tree layout is from my previous endgame build. And you'll see that some skill points I used, I'm not even using that skill. But I'll have the full skill tree layout in a D4 build planner in the description below. So starting with the basic skills. Now you do need to take 2 basic skills in order to easily swap weapons and generate U Fury. So the first basic skill I'm using is Lunging Strike. And the second basic skill I'm using is Frenzy. And with these 2 basic skills, we can easily swap weapons. Next for the core skills, you want to put 5 points into Hammer of the Ancients, a point into Enhanced Hammer of the Ancients, and a point into Furious Hammer of the Ancients. And this is our main damage dealing skill that will one-shot Uber bosses. Next for the defensive skills, you want to put a point into Rallying Cry, a point into Enhanced Rallying Cry, and a point into Tactical Rallying Cry. And this skill will grant you Unstoppable and generate U Fury. Next for the brawling skills, you want to put a point into War Cry, a point into Enhanced War Cry, and a point into Power War Cry. And this skill will grant you Berserking and greatly increase your damage. Next for the weapon mastery skills, you want to put 3 points into Pit Fighter, and this will greatly increase your damage to close enemies. And next for the ultimate skills, you want to put a point into Wrath of the Berserker, a point into Prime Wrath of the Berserker, and a point into Supreme Wrath of the Berserker. And this skill will grant you Berserking, Unstoppable, and greatly increase your damage. Next, you want to put 3 points into Tempered Fury, and this skill will increase your maximum fury. And then you want to put 3 points into Furious Impulse. And this skill is really important because every time you swap weapons, you will gain fury. So this skill will allow us to gain fury without any enemies around. And next, you want to put 3 points into Heavy Handed, 3 points into Wall Up, and 3 points into Brute Force. And these skills will greatly increase your damage when using a one-handed weapon. And last but not least, for the key passive, you want to put a point into Unbridled Rage. And this will greatly increase your core skills damage, but in return, it will cost more fury. Okay, so that's pretty much the full skill tree layout for this build. And like I mentioned before, not every skill point is needed in order to do the big one-shot hit. And I'll have the full skill tree layout in a D4 build planner in the description below. Next for the weapon expertise. Now I'm using the two-handed axe expertise, and this will greatly increase your damage and critical strike chance to vulnerable enemies. Okay, so next for the gear and legendary aspects. I do want to mention that some of the gear and legendary aspects is required in order to do the big one-shot overpower hit. But other pieces of gears and stats don't really matter. For example, your defensive gear. So I'm just going to quickly go over the important gear and legendary aspects for this build and skip over what is not important. But I'll have the full build layout in a D4 build planner in the description below. So starting with the helmet, you're looking to use the Godslayer Crown unique helmet. The reason why is because its unique aspect, which states when you stun, freeze, or immobilize an elite enemy or damage a boss, it pulls in nearby enemies, you deal 60% increased damage to them for 3 seconds. This effect can only occur once every 12 seconds. And this unique aspect will greatly increase your damage against bosses because right before you do the big overpower one-shot hit, you'll use a quick basic skill to activate this unique aspect. Now for the gloves, you're looking for ranks 2 Hammer of the Ancients, and the legendary aspect I have is that Hammer of the Ancients quakes outward and its damage is increased by 15%. And this legendary aspect will increase your damage of your Hammer of the Ancients. Next for the pants, you're looking for the Tybalt's Will unique pants because of its unique aspect, which states you deal 40% increased damage while unstoppable and for 4 seconds after. When you become unstoppable, gain 50 of your primary resource. And because of our skills, we will become unstoppable, and this will greatly increase our damage. Next for the weapons. Now the stats you're looking for all your weapons is all stats, strength, overpower damage, and damage while berserking. And the legendary aspect I have for the two-handed mace is that each point of fury you generate while at maximum fury grants your next core skill within 5 seconds 4% increased damage up to 60%. Now for the one-handed weapons, ideally you're looking for a mace because its base stats has overpower damage. And for this weapon, the legendary aspect I have is that skills deal up to 20% increased damage based on your available primary resource when cast, receiving the maximum benefit while you have full primary resource. And for the second one-handed weapon, you're also looking for a mace. And for the two-handed slashing weapon, you're looking for an axe because its base stats has damage to healthy enemies. And the legendary aspect I have is that after swapping weapons 8 times, your next non-basic skill will overpower and deal 100% increased overpower damage. And this legendary aspect is important because this legendary aspect will allow us to easily one-shot bosses. And for the amulet, you're looking for the Banished Lord's Talisman unique amulet because of its unique aspect, which states after you spend 300 of your primary resource, your next core skill is guaranteed to overpower. Your critical strikes that overpower deal 120% increased damage. Now we're only using this amulet to get the 120% increased damage. If we activate the first part of this unique aspect, which procs the overpower hit, then you have to unequip the amulet and then reequip equip it to remove the proc for the overpower hit, because it's better to use the Earth Striker legendary aspect, which will do 100% increased overpower damage. And for the rings, the first ring I have is the Ring of Red Furor unique ring. And this ring is important because of its unique aspect, which states after spending 100 fury within 3 seconds, your next cast of Hammer of the Ancients, Upheaval, or Death Blow within 5 seconds is a guaranteed critical strike that deals 30% bonus critical strike damage. And this ring is important to guarantee a critical strike with your Hammer of the Ancients. And for the second ring, I'm using a legendary ring, and the stats you're looking for is damage while berserking, maximum fury, and resource regeneration. Now with this gear and setup, you should easily do around 300 million damage and easily one-shot Uber Duriel, because Uber Duriel has around 190 million health with a 4-man party. But I do want to mention that if you're fighting Uber Lilith, then I would switch out the Banished Lord's Talisman for a legendary amulet like this. The reason why is you're looking for movement speed on your amulet when fighting Uber Lilith, because with high movement speed, you can easily dodge Uber Lilith's fireball. And if you're fighting Uber Lilith solo, she has way less life than Uber Duriel in a 4-man party. So you can easily one-shot Uber Lilith without the Banished Lord's Talisman. But I'll have an upcoming video explaining how to easily defeat Uber Lilith and dodge all her mechanics with no Uber uniques. And next, really quickly, for the gems, you're looking to put ruby gems on your armor pieces to increase your maximum life, and ruby gems on your weapons to increase your overpower damage. And also, you can see you don't need to use your Celestial Construct in order to do the big one-shot overpower hit. Okay, so next for the Paragon Board, and this Paragon Board is similar to my previous endgame build Paragon Board. So I'm just going to quickly go over this Paragon Board and the important legendary nodes and glyphs. But I'll have the full Paragon Board layout in a D4 build planner in the description below. So starting with the starter board, I'm using the exploit glyph, and this glyph is very important because this glyph will allow you to apply vulnerable to the Uber bosses. Next Paragon Board I'm using is Carnage, and the glyph I'm using is Eerie, and this glyph is important because it will greatly increase your berserking damage. And with this Paragon Board, I did split it into 3 directions. So first heading left this way, and the next Paragon Board I took is Blood Rage, and I took the legendary node. And this legendary node is very important because it states killing a bleeding enemy has a 10% chance to grant berserking for 5 seconds. Your damage is increased by 25% of your damage while berserking bonus. Now the first part of this legendary node isn't important at all because we're going to get berserking from our shouts, but the second part is, which is your damage is increased by 25% of your damage while berserking bonus. And as you can see, our current bonus is at 73%. So this legendary node will greatly increase your damage. Then heading back to the Carnage Paragon Board, and then heading up this way. The next Paragon Board I took is Weapon Master, and I also took the legendary node, which states swapping weapons grants you 4% of your maximum fury. And this legendary node is important because when you swap weapons, you'll gain fury, and this will allow you to gain fury without any enemies around. And then heading back to the Carnage legendary board, and then heading right this way. The next Paragon Board I took is Decimator, and the glyph I took is Crusher, and this glyph will greatly increase your overpower damage when wielding a mace. Then heading down this way, and the last Paragon Board I took is Warbringer, and the glyph I took is Might, and this glyph will increase your damage when wielding two-handed weapons. So that's the full Paragon Board layout for this build. But I do want to mention that there are some Paragon points that you can change around because I did focus a little more on defense and survivability on this Paragon Board. But make sure you do take the important legendary nodes that I mentioned and the glyphs. And I'll have the full Paragon Board layout in a D4 build planner in the description below. Okay, so thanks for checking out this video on how to easily do over 300 million damage with the Barbarian in Season 3 with no Uber uniques. I call this technique the Overpower Life Swap Technique, or the OP Life Swap Tech for short. And this technique is very easy to set up without any enemies around you or without using any shouts. And I will have an updated video on how to easily destroy Uber Lilith and dodge all her mechanics with no Uber uniques, so stay tuned. Hope this helps in more Diablo 4 videos to come, and of course,